Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Information Week webinar, How DevOps Can Simplify IT Operations. I'm Peggy Bresnick, and I'm with Information Week, and I'll be your moderator today. This webinar is sponsored by BMC Software and broadcast by UBM. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in a Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the Resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we will ask you to complete our survey. It's found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. And finally, if you experience any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or simply type your issue into the Q&A area, and we will be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. Now on to our presentation, How DevOps Can Simplify IT Operations. Discussing today's topic are Helen Beal, DevOpsologist at Ranger 4, and Tina Sturgis, Solutions Marketing Director at BMC Software. Helen has 20 years' experience working in the technology industry with a focus on the software development lifecycle for a wealth of cross-industry clients in the UK and abroad. Helen is passionate about DevOps, referring to herself as a DevOpsologist, and is the creator of the Ranger 4 DevOps Liftoff Workshop and the Ranger 4 DevOps Maturity Assessment, winner of the IBM Beacon Award 2015 for Outstanding DevOps Solution. She is on the Board of Regents at the DevOps Institute and co-assigned the Phoenix Project game with GamingWorks, which was key in Ranger 4's winning the 2016 DevOps Dozen Award for Most Innovative DevOps Solution Provider. We welcome Helen today. Also with us today is Tina Sturgis. Tina is currently a Solutions Marketing Director focusing on Control M Automation API and bringing more ops into dev with jobs as code. With her, she brings 20-plus years experience in enterprise software sales, services, and marketing. Prior to joining BMC in September 2016, Tina spent nearly 13 years at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Software, focusing her expertise in project and portfolio management, application lifecycle management, and most recently DevOps across the HPE products and services portfolio. Her vast DevOps experience lies in how to implement a DevOps methodology, what a DevOps operating model should look like, and how to make DevOps really work inside complex organizations by measuring success and focusing on organizational change. Tina earned her BBA degree in accounting and economics from the University of Michigan. Welcome, Tina, and Helen, over to you.
Thanks so much, Peggy, and hello to everybody on the call. As Peggy said, my name's Helen. I am a DevOpsologist. It's a job title I made up, and it's intended to describe what I do, which is study DevOps all day, every day, doing things like this, talking to organizations about how they do it, coaching and consulting. And today I'm going to talk about the DevOps super pattern and how that fits into DevOps from the IT operations perspective. So I'd like to start by talking about the history of DevOps, so kind of set the scene a little bit. And this kind of helps us explain how organizations often consume DevOps or how DevOps proliferates across an organization. So there's a Belgian chap called Patrick Dubois who started this whole thing off. And he was going to an event in Toronto, and a guy called Andrew Schaefer had said that he wanted to have a kind of breakout session about agile system administration. And Patrick tootled along to this presentation and was the only person there, literally the only person there. Even Andrew hadn't turned up because he didn't think anyone else was going to turn up. But Patrick felt really passionate about this subject. He felt that ops and dev were having real problems getting on together, and that, you know, developers were doing agile and the system admins weren't really keeping up or understanding what was going on. So he tracked Andrew down and had a conversation with him. And after that, they set up a Google group about agile system administration and started this conversation across the world. Following that, a couple of guys from Flickr, a guy from Dev and a guy from Ops, stood on stage at Velocity and talked about the work that they'd done together. And this thing started to get momentum, and people really encouraged Patrick to explore this further. And that culminated in Patrick starting an event in his home country, Belgium, as I mentioned, in a town called Ghent, and that was DevOps Days. And DevOps Days was promoted via Twitter using a hashtag, and this is really where the term DevOps came from. And this is kind of important because it kind of shows you how DevOps is often rootsy. It started as a grassroots phrase. So we get asked a lot, you know, is DevOps, is it top down or is it bottom up? And the answer is it's a bit of both. So DevOps kind of started, and you can see the analysts starting to get involved, and more as the large vendors getting involved and more events happening. You see the publication of the Phoenix project, and you see the DevOps Institute being stood up and more technologies coming through. So that's just a bit of background of where DevOps has come from. Obviously now a very popular term that people talk about. So let's try and talk about what DevOps actually is then. So we spend a lot of time being asked to define DevOps, and DevOps defies definition for particular reasons that we'll look at in a bit more detail in a moment. But if really pushed, we'll say DevOps is about making better software faster and more safely, and the "and more safely" piece is really important. That really is part of the ops side of it. So it's about having great governance, but light touch governance, not too much. It's about evolving ops to ensure that quality and security and performance are all considered very early on in the life cycle. But I also really like this quote from Mark Schwartz's book. So Mark Schwartz has just left his position as CIO of US Immigration and Customs, and is going to be travelling the world, I understand, talking about this stuff. This is a great book. It's published by IT Revolution, which is the press also behind the Phoenix project and the DevOps handbook that came out in late December last year. And I really like this definition because it talks about value and it talks about pipelines. And we really like talking about value streams now in DevOps and involving the whole of the business environment in delivering value and features to customers and users. So I mentioned a moment ago that DevOps defies definition, and that's kind of a conscious thing that's happened. So people that are involved in DevOps felt that we'd come unstuck a little bit with things like ITIL by producing massive books that people took and then directly tried to apply them to their organization rather than trying to understand it deeply and apply it practically to their unique fingerprint, if you like. So I like to use the word fingerprint to describe how organisations are all different, because they're all similar and there are patterns, but every organisation has their unique fingerprint of where their constraints are at that point in time, or how challenging their culture might be, or where they've got to with levels of automation. So unlike the Agile Manifesto, DevOps doesn't have a sort of online definition. There's something in Wikipedia which is a pretty good definition. It's quite regularly updated, but generally DevOps tries to not get pinned down. So I try to explain this by this picture here. So we've got like these scales, and on one side we've got this bird that's flying free, which is great because it really allows DevOps to evolve. And in fact, this whole talk is about kind of this next evolution of DevOps and what's really contributing to it now. Where that becomes a little bit challenging, though, is if you are actually trying to use DevOps, if you're actually trying to harness its methodologies and principles and practices and make them into practical, actionable items. And that's the cage. This is where we try and pin down what DevOps really means and apply it to be something useful for people to make their working lives better. So you probably or maybe come across this before. I mentioned the DevOps handbook a moment ago. There were 4 authors to the DevOps handbook. One was Patrick Dubois, the Belgian that started the whole thing off. Another was Gene Kim, one of the authors of the Phoenix project that I also mentioned. One, Jez Humble, who we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, and the other, a gentleman called John Willis. And John Willis came up with this acronym a few years back, and John Willis was at the very first DevOps Days in Ghent. He's a big proponent and speaker in the DevOps movement. He works for Docker at the moment. And he came up with this acronym. I often refer to it as an elevator acronym. So you've probably heard of elevator pitches, that kind of 30-second thing that you can explain to a CEO in a lift. This is similar. If you're trying to explain to somebody what DevOps is, it's useful to remember CAMs, culture, automation, measurement, sharing. Those are the things that DevOps is about. I said I'd mention Jez Humble. Again, Jez Humble is the author of Continuous Delivery and also Lean Enterprise, also one of the co-authors of the annual State of DevOps report. And Jez put an L in this as well, so you'll often hear people talk about CALMs, and that is them putting lean in as well. Now, the reason I haven't got lean in this one will become apparent shortly as we're seeing it as a component spoke of the super pattern. But that's a useful acronym to set the scene. So last year at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London, I did an initial talk with Lego, a company that we work with, well known to most people, about the correlations between holacracy and DevOps. So as we just saw, the C in CAMS explains that a lot about DevOps is about culture. So holacracy is a really great way to think about what your culture looks like now and what it could look like in the future, and maybe get some tips on how to move the dial on it. And it has lots of similarities with DevOps, and the talk was quite popular, so I did it a few more times last year, and I did it again in Munich in December, and John Willis, who I just mentioned is the originator of CAMS and one of the authors of the DevOps Handbook, came up to me afterwards and he said, yeah, I've seen you talk about holacracy and DevOps. He says, he'd also heard me use this phrase that I stole from my friend Jane Grohl at the ITM SM Academy, and she also runs the DOI, DevOps Institute. The phrase I stole was that DevOps is a harmonious polygamous marriage between Agile, Lean and ITSM. So we'd identified these kind of three things, and then I put holacracy in the mix, and we're saying all these things are contributing parts and systems of thinking that are converging, and the best practices are being pulled out and making this thing that we're calling DevOps. And John said, I've got a three-legged stool that I talk about as well. My three-legged stool is theory of constraints and safety cultures and learning organisation. And all of these things I feel are contributing to the body of knowledge, this collective body of knowledge, or CBOK, that is DevOps. So thus this concept of the super pattern has arisen. And in fact, I saw John Willis again last week at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London. That just happened last week, and we continued this conversation, and we're building more on this. But let's explore in a little bit more detail some of the particular areas of super pattern. But actually, just before I move off that slide, I'm just going to point out for fun that the watermark on that slide is they're pictures of a £2 coin that we have here in the UK, and some of our £2 coins have a phrase written around at the side, which is standing on the shoulders of giants. And I particularly like that, because that's what we're kind of saying here, is we're taking all of these brilliant thinkers and bringing them together and trying to interpret what we're learning and bring it all into the DevOps principles. So I like to talk about this Agile principle in particular. So you can obviously read these if you go to the Agile Manifesto online. But this one really, to me, kind of resonates, and John and I are talking about doing kind of Venn diagram, because this kind of crosses over into Lean. So this idea that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, to use Da Vinci's words, this idea of working really smart and taking all the waste out of the process is very Lean thinking as well. So Agile, obviously, a really big underpinning part of DevOps. Lots of development teams around the world, probably most, if not all, development teams around the world are trying Agile with varying degrees of success, and it tends to come first, and then the ops people see these developers that are under lots of pressure from the business to put lots of change through. They see this happening and they wonder how they can get more involved and how they can support their teams better. They might be getting slightly irritated that they're getting given code frequently without very good instructions, and the code's coming across and it hasn't really had considerations made around things like quality, security, performance, all those NFRs, or the non-functional requirements that we in ops, on the ops side, are really concerned about. So that's the Agile piece. So I mentioned that this thing kind of came around in the first place from this talk I did around holacracy. So there is a blog post there, it's just a picture of it there. And the kind of things that correlate are things like self-organising teams, really big in DevOps, really big in Agile, very big in Holacracy as well. Concepts like continuous funding, which is one we're exploring more and more these days in the DevOps world. So trying to get away from waterfall budgetary processes where annually we sit down for 2 or 3 months and put big numbers in the table and try and approve various bits of them, and we could be spending that money sort of 15 months after we've thought about it and set it into the budget. Whereas, you know, in Agile, we're trying to do things in 2-week increments, so we need to understand how to fund sensibly around that as well. Another thing that DevOps and Holacracy both don't like is job titles, which is partly why I invented the kind of title DevOpsologist myself. It's meant to be more of a role descriptor than a kind of formalised job title. The reason that neither form likes job titles is because they're quite labelling and they don't allow us to cross-skill very much. And we love cross-skilling in DevOps, and we do in Holacracy as well. We love being able to move around teams. And if we have very clear kind of rigid focus around job titles, it can drive behaviours such as not my job, which is not a very DevOpsy thing to do. It's, you know, we want lots of flexibility and fluidity in the work that we do. So Holacracy is pretty interesting to look at. And I really like this quote from, it's from Frederick Lully's book, Reinventing Organisations, which is quite a lot about Holacracy. Change is obviously a huge subject in all IT departments. The change is the big thing that the dev and the ops people are trying to handle together. They're trying to make change happen frequently but very reliably. And one of the big constraints that we often see is a cab cycle. So lots of change approval boards, and it can be very painful for people to get through those boards. Sometimes it's felt that the people on the boards are kind of not really properly engaged in the process and don't fully understand it. So we like things like peer review changes and peer reviewed processes in both DevOps and Holacracy as well. And then the other thing that we end up talking about quite a lot about when we're doing DevOps is words like transformation or evolution. And transformation is frequently bandied about, but actually quite an unpopular word with lots of places we work within, because people have done transformations before. They may have worked, they may have failed. Transformations often involve a reorganisation which involves a lot of redundancies, so they become unpopular. And people have very high expectations of lots of change happening rapidly, and lots of people don't really like change and react quite badly to it. So if we talk about evolution and constant adaptation and incremental change, it can actually be quite helpful to frame our DevOps journey in that way, so people feel more comfortable at it. So this quote from Holacracy from Reinventing Organisations is really explaining that if we are used to constant small adaptations, change no longer becomes this big thing that we're frightened of, or we think we've got a big problem tackling it. It becomes like a habit, it becomes natural to us. So kind of moving on to a bit about Lean, when the DevOps Handbook was published last year, I think it was officially published around December last year. We had quite a few kind of pre-copies flying about. But when we first saw this, we were really like, yes, that's brilliant, because there was all this talk about value stream and using Lean tools like value stream mapping to help us plan what we're going to do and plan these changes and identify these incremental improvements that we can make. So this is a massive Lean tool. If you're Six Sigma, you'll know all about it. It's really valuable, and it's a really great way to start a DevOps journey, and it's an incredibly effective way of identifying waste. We typically see reductions of 50 to 60% in terms of the work time and elapsed time a process would take once we work together as a team. The reason it's so powerful is that normally individuals in a value stream are only really aware and only really think about and see their particular bits, so they don't fully understand all of the handoffs. And if you get those people in a room, and frequently when we do value stream mapping, it's the first time those people have ever been in a room together, even though they're involved with this whole end-to-end value stream. And much like Kanban, it's all about visualization. So similar to Kanban, it's quite post-it note oriented. So you are visualizing the value stream end to end, and once you can see it, you can appreciate where the handoffs are between processes and where the problems are and where the waste is. So very, very valuable DevOps tool there from the Lean portfolio of tools. So I mentioned the Phoenix project earlier on. Phoenix Project book, we've often, John Willis described it as a hack to me the other day. It's like, people want to know about DevOps, go and buy a copy of Phoenix Project, read it, give it to your boss, and you'll be on your DevOps journey. Life is a little bit more complicated than that, obviously, hence things like the game that was mentioned earlier on. So you can actually do things like use the principles of the book for experiential learning, for example. And this is the bit where kind of John and I kind of were starting to feel a bit like someone asks about DevOps and you give them a big reading list. So part of what we're trying to do with the super pattern is lift that away, that reading list, and lift the lid on this stuff and help people understand how it all fits together. Underpinning the Phoenix Project is the 3 ways, and you can see the 3 ways on this slide on the right hand side. So we've got the first way, which is about flow between DevOps, and we've got the second way, which is about amplifying feedback loops, and then the third way, which is about continual experimentation and learning. And you'll see how we try and apply these 3 ways in a few moments to these various different systems of thinking. But the other thing that's really underpinning the Phoenix Project is the theory of constraint. So the theory of constraint basically tells us that in any value stream, there is going to be a bottleneck that is the main thing. And we understand things when we understand the theory of constraints. Things like if we make an improvement anywhere along the value stream that is not as a constraint, it's just an illusion. So if you think about a manufacturing pipeline, and all of this thinking around lean and theory of constraints comes out of manufacturing, it comes out of Toyota. If you think, and it helps us to visualize it, and that's part of the challenges of working technology sometimes, is everything is so ethereal, it's all bits and bytes in the ether. So if we think about the manufacturing pipeline, if we think about, for example, automation as a pipeline or as a tool chain, it can really help us get a deeper understanding. So yes, the theory of constraints is basically that we need to identify these constraints one by one and elevate them and remove them, and then there'll be the next one and the next one. And that, again, is a really effective tool as you're going through your DevOps evolutionary journey to identify which things to tackle in which order. So you've probably heard phrases like fail fast, fail smart, fail safe, fail often. So in DevOps, we really love failure. We actually really embrace it as a concept. And we do that because we like innovation. And if we're trying to do new things, we will naturally fail. But there kind of comes up with a caveat. We need to fail safely. So we need environments where we have systems that mean that if something does mess up, it's not a catastrophic failure. So we need either things like preemptive monitoring or something that allows us to redeploy a last name div state virtually instantly. We need lots of testing early on so that failures don't get passed downstream. We need lots of things to help us have a safe environment. And this is really where the safety culture comes in. So I really love this excerpt from the DevOps Handbook as well. I use it a lot with people, and I try and break it down and try and use it as a maturity assessment tool to ask people, you know, have you got shared version control repositories? Have you got pre-blessed security libraries? Have you got a deployment pipeline? Have you got the automatic code quality tools? Have you got the automatic security scanning tools? Have you got known good environments? So it's very useful to kind of review this in these in these contexts. And the reason I've highlighted a couple of bits in green there is when we're talking about safety cultures, we are talking about performance failures, but we are also talking about cybersecurity risk as well. So one of the things that we really encourage people to do is think of security as everyone's job, not just security's job. So this concept of DevSecOps, where developers can have an understanding of what the OWASP threats are, where they could potentially even have tools that are built into their IDE that are going to give them warnings and help them ensure that any artifacts or binaries that they're putting into an application is going to be safe. So a big bit about safety culture there. So in this matrix, what we've attempted to do is take CAMs, as we described earlier on, and then put it alongside these various different bits of the super pattern and describe how these bits fit together. So, you know, you can take some time to read this yourself, but you can see kind of, if we just pick some out, we can see in Lean, for example, we've got this focus on the customer, and that's a repeated message. So if you look at Agile Service Management, we've got so Agile and Service Management being kind of the successor of ITSM. We've got service to the customer. In Agile, we've got the customer is elevated. So you can see these commonalities, these kind of patterns going across these various different areas. So another thing I thought about while we were exploring the super pattern was where all these things have come from, how long they've been around. So I just did a quick chart to show that, and you might surprise you to know how long lean has been around in terms of the principles, in particular if you think of it in the context of your own organisation and how much you're using of it. And you can see the other thing I thought was very interesting. I put a little globe on here to reflect this, is that lots of these things came from different places. So the Agile one, that came from some mountains in Utah on a skiing resort. Holacracy comes out of the US as well, but ITSM came out of the government in the UK. We've got Lean coming out of Japan. We've got safety culture initially coming out of Russia with the Chernobyl incident. So it's kind of like this. I love this kind of globality, kind of global nature of all these bits pushing into DevOps. And on this slide, you can see an attempt by me to really align these things again. So these 7 components that we've identified as the super pattern alongside the 3 ways that I described earlier. So, which ones are really primarily concerned with flow, which ones are really interested about feedback loops, and which ones are about experimentation and learning. And that 3rd way is the most difficult way for a lot of organisations, particularly if you've been around a long time and you've got lots of technical debt. You'll probably find that most of your days are spent firefighting or doing unplanned work, and then when you're not doing that, you're trying to get some of that innovation that the business is demanding out the door, but the time to actually sit down and experiment and learn is quite hard to find. So this thing about change, as we said earlier, not everybody likes change. It can be well received or not well received. So if you ask people who want change, most people will tell you that they're quite up for some change. Thank you very much. Sounds like a good idea, making some improvements. But you ask people who want to change and you get quite a different response, because we're all quite happy with who we are most of the time. So it's quite difficult to get people to sometimes take the action of changing upon themselves. And there's all sorts of tips and techniques we can learn in DevOps to help with that. Gets even worse though if we ask who wants to lead the change, like the room clears, no one's left. So the change agents that you often need to really pioneer DevOps revolution, if you like, or evolution through an organisation can be few and far between. So I just want to finish up on a couple more points. So this started, it's a bit of a joke, this one, the Bill Hedmark Golden Square. It started out as a conversation I was having with a gentleman called Magnus Hedmark on LinkedIn, and we were talking about this iron triangle that we've always assumed that we've had in IT, where you can only have things at low cost and at high speed if they're of very low quality. So this kind of this iron triangle that we've had of cost, quality and time in the past. What we're really saying with DevOps is you can have all those 3 things. So you can deliver stuff deliver it very fast and at very low cost and at very high quality. This is a set of principles that allows us to do this using things like automation and using tools from Lean to make our processes better and helping people create the right cultures. And we kind of have this golden square because Magnus and I were like, well, there's a 4th thing that we get out of all of this, which is delight. So it's customer satisfaction, customer delight, and employee happiness. So one of the things that we're doing in DevOps a lot of the time is looking for ways to make people's days at work better, less painful, less stressful, less friction and fraughtness at work. So just to summarise, what we're really trying to do is get that value stream from the idea to the realisation of the value of that idea. We're trying to get that value stream and we're trying to shrink it. We're compressing that spring, so we want to take waste out, we want to automate all the bits that we can, we want to make it as friction-free as possible and as fast as possible. So you can view this in a slightly different way if you like. So we talk about this ideation to realization. So this is the DevOps loop, and the DevOps loop describes basically a continuous release cycle. So us getting that requirement out of the business, understanding what it is, tracing it all the way through its life cycle, and then measuring how much it is worth when it goes out into life. So this is really where we start thinking about what that DevOps tool chain looks like, what these automated components are that are going to enable our IT operations and our development people to really work better together. So I'm going to pass over to Tina now to talk more about jobs as code. So Thank you very much for your time listening to me. Be DevOps-tastic. And now over to Tina.
Thanks, Helen. That's great. And actually, what you've described is you kind of married me right into where I need to be, because, again, when you talk about DevOps, DevOps isn't just, I mean, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of people change, organizational change, process change, automation, and then there's obviously the software tools that help us to do that. And throughout the entire application development lifecycle, whether you're doing Agile or Waterfall or some sort of hybrid, when you're developing, the automation piece within the software is always key, right? So if you can eliminate the manualness, if you will, of a process, you're going to do that. And obviously there's still sanity checks that, you know, are encouraged by, you know, the manual nature of somebody coming in and making sure that it works well. But at the end of the day, the automation can save a lot of time and a lot of money. So that's what we're going to talk about here with this jobs as code approach. I am going to go to the next slide here. Okay, so from a software vendor perspective, why this move towards DevOps? And what we've seen is really, you know, the digital business and people being always on. They're always on their mobile, they're on their tablets, they're on their computers, they're on the Wi-Fi, on airplanes. People are connected all the time, and it's this digital nature of our culture today that's really pushing you know, the application world. And obviously we've been, you know, IT's been creating applications and we've been buying applications and we've been doing all of those things for many years. But really that's where this look into how can we start to reduce cost and expedite applications. Because we know in our mobile, in a mobile device, you have an application, you download it. If it doesn't delight you, as Helen said earlier, within a matter of seconds, the user is gone. So we need to make sure that we are keeping up with that delighted customer expectation as well. So two of the areas that we have under the, you know, why applications power that digital business are two main things. Really, it's improving the operations, so kind of how things are getting done within the organizations. And, you know, there's the example of Starbucks, you know, can forecast and deliver the products to over 20,000 locations via a single logistics system. And that's really powered by an application and automation within those applications, moving things around, etc. And then you also have, you know, what every business wants to do is growing the revenue. You know, being able to push out, in PayPal's case, push out, you'll see a spike whenever you go to check out into a, you know, another, you know, shopping experience, you'll see PayPal as an option, and that's one of their ways that they've grown the revenue. If it's an option, people are going to use it. It's faster. You don't have to pull your credit card out. You don't have to key that credit card in, and basically it's a very safe, secure environment. So the digital business is really powering the need for these applications in DevOps. This report here, it actually is from the state of DevOps from last year. I know the new one came out recently, so I'll need to update this slide, but the numbers are still, I think, accurate here in the fact that as people go through and are adopting DevOps, they are realizing benefits. They're realizing more frequent deployments, faster recovery from failures, and again, that goes back to what Helen talked about, which is, you know, making sure that it's secure, that we have a rollback plan. If we fail, that's okay. Let's you know, roll it back and keep moving, learn from our mistakes, and the lessons learned are very huge within the DevOps culture. Less unplanned rework. So it's very interesting to me about rework, because over the 25 years I've been in the software industry, some organizations don't see rework as a real cost. They've never really measured it. So when the DevOps research organization connected with the IT Revolution put out their report, I think it was in March, they really helped solidify to the DevOps community that rework is a cost. And they actually started to assist organizations with understanding each and every, like how to actually calculate that. And what does it mean if you do X amount of rework at a certain point in time in the software development life cycle. So less unplanned rework is also obviously very important. So what I'm here to talk to you about is one area of what you do within application development. It's a very important area, and it's about batch or micro batch, or maybe you've heard it called job scheduling. So this is when you are building an application, and it's kind of like it tells the system what to do, right? So it's kind of like the foundation of the system, and it says, okay, at this point in time, if I buy a transaction, go out to the inventory, reduce the amount of inventory from here, update the credit card information, move a file, do this, and then update a whole bunch of different things. And that's all a very complicated process, and that's what we typically call batch. And I know what you'll probably think in your head is, wow, batch is such a very old, my grandfather used batch on the mainframe. Batch is still very modern. Large financial institutions, retailers, it is the heart and the bread and butter of what they do in batch. The problem is that we do think of batch as a point in time. Hey, I'll process this every 24 hours, or I'll do that. And that's kind of where the micro batching term comes in, because we're not really talking about a one day, one time, every 24-hour type of action. It can be seconds, and lots of organizations and lots of applications are using micro-batching, where they can go out and they're doing small little bits and bytes throughout the day to update the information. So why is batch important? Well, about 50 or 70% of enterprise application services within most organizations are batch. They're driven by jobs, the job schedules, the predecessor-successor relationships. Do this before you do that. And a lot of times what organizations are doing is they are developing manual scripts or one-off scripts from the development organization to kind of manage all of these transactions. Well, in comes what we call the DevOps blind spot, because one of the things that we've seen within DevOps is a lot of great foundational work, from an organizational change to automation to updating the culture, etc. But one piece of the process that hasn't really been addressed in a lot of DevOps organizations is this job automation, job schedule automation. And the reason being is I don't think that people have really thought about it. It's been an operations tool. Operations goes in. They usually take an enterprise job scheduling tool or workload automation tool, like a Control-M from BMC, and they fix any issues that they may or may not have. They do a little bit of rework, and perhaps in some cases a lot of rework, before it goes into production, because operations does what it does best, right? It makes sure that we have a production-ready application, so when it's there, we have no issues, or we hope to have no issues, or no defects, or no downs, etc. So the DevOps blind spot really is about shifting that left and putting into the hands of the developers the coding, the testing, and the debugging of all of these job or workload schedules. So imagine the power that you have just by allowing the developers to come in and begin to use an enterprise tool from operations. So as an organization, what we did with our Control-M product is we said, how does the developer actually work? Well, the developer, we know, does not want to go into a GUI user interface and want to learn yet another new tool. We know that. That is how they work. They like to go very fast. They're very agile. They're very tech savvy, right? So what we did is we now present to them the ability to define these jobs, test and debug the jobs in the code using JSON and a command line interface. So it's an environment that is very familiar to them. And it fits right within their existing CI/CD pipeline. So it's not like we're trying to change that stream of work that they're already doing. If it's Jenkins, their source control management system, our code will go directly into that and it actually will just follow right along, just like with the business logic flows that they're creating within their scripts already. So it's become a very interesting ride for us on this, what we call jobs as code, that sort of that shift left notion within it. So let me go to the next slide. So let me talk a little bit. I don't have a ton more time here, but so I'm going to kind of go through fast here. But what I want to do is I want to give you a little bit of a visual of what traditional job and workload scheduling looks like. So you can see at the bottom is your sort of traditional software development life cycle, and you have the effort spent on scheduling on the left-hand side, and along the bottom we have our time, right? So what happens now is, you know, in traditional, how it's always happened, we've gone through and we have these small little speed bumps as we go through each of the phases. And it's been okay. Honestly, we've always known we've had some of these speed bumps as we create these job and workload scheduling. We know that there's some rework that needs to be done prior to moving it into production when the handoff between dev and ops happens. We also know that maybe some of the tests haven't really been run as often or as much as we should have earlier on in the life cycle. And it's been okay for us. Sure, we've seen some hiccups and we've seen some issues, but at the end of the day, it's been okay for us. But as we've expedited and we've incorporated the lean principles and agile principles into the development process, those speed bumps get a little bit harder on that car, as you can see my visual there. You know, that car will hit those speed bumps at a much faster rate, which will ultimately give you a problem when you're looking in the handoff into production, where you'll delay, you'll have some failures, and, you know, potentially you'll have that long recovery. So this is a little bit about also the security of what we're doing and what we're implementing when we change our processes. So when you shift the jobs left into the hands of the developers, what you see here, the orange represents what we just saw on the last screen. We have a little bit more even spend and over time throughout the application development life cycle here. And you have a higher quality of code because you have better dry run testing, et cetera, that's happening during earlier phases. And we all know that when you test things earlier, it's a lot cheaper to fix that error or defect, et cetera, earlier on than it is when it's in production. So that's just to kind of give you a visual of what we're talking about here. And within the jobs as code approach with Control-M as our product, you can remove those speed bumps, and you have inherent scalability. I think that's pretty obvious. You also have, you enable for innovation, and that innovation we're talking about is reducing the amount of work that the developer is coding those manual scripts, those one-off scripts, and allowing the developer to focus more on the innovation, maybe customer user experience, et cetera, focusing on what's important to delight that customer in the end game. Also, the dev to ops harmony is increased. What happens here just naturally when an organization starts to implement this jobs as code approach is you're sharing skills within a tool, within a software tool, and now dev understands why operations has always halted some of those applications that they've put in, in front of them. And so now they're like, oh, now I get it, because they see how it works and they see how it will be implemented later on. And then conversely, operations actually gains a tremendous amount of confidence in development, so that when it comes to that handoff to release into production, they're like, okay, yeah, great. This looks really good. The amount of rework is actually reduced, and they keep moving forward. So that is the conclusion of my presentation here with Jobs as Code with Control-M, and I will pass it back to Peggy.
Thanks, Tina, and thank you so much, Helen, as well. Before we begin with today's Q&A, please direct your attention to our webinar survey available on the right of the presentation window. If you close the survey, you can reopen the widget by clicking on the icon along the bottom of your screen. We thank you in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation in the survey allows us to better serve you. And now on to the Q&A portion of our event. As a reminder, to participate in the question and answer session, simply type your question into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or simply click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. If we are not able to get to and answer all submitted questions during today's webinar, we'll be sure to share them with our speakers who can reply to you personally and offline. So we have had a few questions come in. The first question is, how do you balance speed with software quality? I think, Helen, perhaps you could take a stab at this? Or Tina,
yeah,
would
I'll
you
give
like
it a go.
To jump in? Okay.
Yeah, I'll start perhaps. So, yes, so how do you balance speed with software quality? So, we need to use a number of tools. So we need to use some tools from the Agile toolset. So Agile says that we do things in 2-week sprints, and we have a dedicated team that includes testers. And in a similar way that Tina was describing shifting left, in terms of workload, we also shift testing far left as well. So we have tests done very early on in the cycle and continually through the sprint. Another tool that we can use is from TDD, which is Agile related, so it's called test-driven development. So we can start writing user stories as tests, so we move tests very early there as well. We can also use automation here also. So all of these things help us build quality in early into our software product. Whilst we're doing all of those things, we are also addressing speed. So when we're doing Agile, we're looking at having MVPs and incremental change so that we can do it fast. We're looking at having Agile teams working together so we're delivering things fast. We're looking at doing automation so that we can take any manual delays, nasty handoffs out of the equation and do these things fast. So there are 3 kind of DevOpsy Agile examples that help us get the quality in. Tina, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think you've answered it perfectly. I mean, again, from an automation software vendor perspective, that's really what our goal is. Again, I think if you're shifting things left, you can test them better. You can test them earlier and find defects earlier, so that helps to ensure and make sure, you know, especially from an operations standpoint, when it goes into production, you know, that it is as production ready as it can be. And I think obviously that is, you do have to temper it. I mean, I'm not going to say you can always go fast and you always have the high quality, but it can be done. There are certain, I call them levers, that you need to push and pull and change, like you said, with, you know, the automation tools, etc. But at the end of the day, it is completely doable depending on the levers that you're pulling.
Great, thank you. Tina, this one's for you. How much effort does it take to enable our developers to code jobs with Control-M?
So that's really, that's a good question. Let me give you an example of a customer. So we have a customer that recently rolled out to their entire development organization, and that includes, you know, across applications that they're developing on for BI and reporting, as well as, you know, other applications that kind of filter through their web page, etc. And what they do is, because it's done in the code, we do use JSON as the coding, you can read it and understand what's happening right away. So all they really need to do is understand some simple notations that we've built in that will call through APIs to our enterprise system. So, you know, I sat through one of the trainings last month on site with them, and the training was literally less than 20 minutes, and they were able to understand where to download it, how to use it, and go forward from there. So it's been a pretty simple task for our customers to do it. So it's not like a huge implementation that needs to happen, which obviously works in the realm of the whole agile kind of lean principles that we're looking at within DevOps.
Terrific. Okay, thank you. Let me see. Helen, I think this is one for you. DevOps seems like a broad set of things. Where do I start?
Yeah, we did get offered this one or asked this one a lot. Um, we have this phrase, which is start where you are. It sounds really obvious, but start where you are and figure out where you are and remember what Canvas is about and remember what measurement, the M in Canvas is about. So find a way to gain a deep understanding about your current state, whether that's building some kind of assessment or using some kind of assessment tool that describes where you are. And that will help you do things if you use things from the super pattern like the theory of constraints or like value stream mapping from the lean toolkit. There are things that will help you gain a picture and identify the key priorities to address. Tina, did you have anything you'd want to add to that one?
Helen, it's great, thank you. Because you know what, it's so funny because you said start where you are. I love that. I may start using it. I did a webinar with Mark Schwartz and some of the U.S. government, and what I had said is, I'm like, you know, at the end of the day, just start. Stop planning, just do it. You know, and that's really the main area. I think a lot of folks that I have seen in my career want to start with automated testing, and it's been helpful for them to start in the automated testing space, but it also has become a little bit of a burden because they feel like, well, how much is enough to automate? Do I have to automate it all, or can I just automate a piece? And they kind of get stuck in that cycle. Again, my recommendation, just like yours, is just find, you know, potentially a specific product or service that you want to DevOps and have at it. Start small, understand, measure yourself from the beginning of where you start to the end, and really understand how much you've been successful over that time, and then you can roll it out in the big picture as well.
Terrific, thank you. Tina, this one's for you. Can you provide a customer example and some benefits this customer is seeing with a jobs as code approach?
Yeah, so I did touch on it already a little bit with the example that I gave a little bit earlier, but some of the benefits, like I said, that they're seeing is, you know, at the end of the day, one of the benefits that as a marketer of the software I didn't really think about, but one of our longtime customers said, you know what, we used to spend 2 to 3 weeks trying to find a job that was manually scripted in an application. We couldn't find it to change, so the developer had, you know, spun off that application or had left the company or changed roles, and they would spend 3 weeks trying to find it. He goes, with implementing this jobs as code approach and putting it right within the code, I can find it in seconds, which to us, seconds versus weeks is an eternity when you're talking about the application delivery lifecycle. So that's one of the biggest benefits that he saw, kind of a very tangible, you know, maybe you don't think about it, but at the end of the day, he was able to find those scripts much easier in the code.
Okay, terrific. Helen, this is for you. We're heavily regulated. How does DevOps support things like segregation of duties when these roles become blurred like this?
Yeah, so we do work with a lot of organisations that are either in sort of banking, insurance, pharma, all very highly regulated. This does come up quite a lot. So I think the confusion is that people hear DevOps and they think of it as no ops. So they think that suddenly developers are going to be doing all the work that operations people do. And that's sometimes some of the case if we can do things like automating deployments and scheduling and stuff like that. But we're really talking about Dev and Ops collaborating better. And then the automation bit gets very interesting because the automation bit allows us to really satisfy the auditor's requirements around segregation of duties. So even if you're saying, right, I do want that developer now to perform that release into that system, which they shouldn't really have access to, you can make it possible that the automated system has a granular access that allows you to really split that out. So you can be absolutely sure that when that developer needs to push that code, for example, that activity is done by somebody that is properly segregated, and you can record it all. So an auditor can come in, they can see very clearly who has what role and who has performed what most critically. So you can be absolutely sure, actually much surer than you can without DevOps and without DevOps automation, that you are performing according to your regulations and the compliance standards that are required from you. Tina, I think that one's probably quite relevant to you as well, because I think that's part of what you're doing in Control M.
Absolutely, yes. So again, Control M and job schedule automation and workload automation is very highly regulated in a lot of highly regulated industries. And inherently, because we're an enterprise system, we've been around for many, many years, we are the leader in this space. What we're providing, again, by handing it over and giving some control to the developers, we don't lose that piece of compliance and governance and separation of duties. It actually now just becomes inherent, whether or not the developer knows that they are, that the handoffs or the separation of duties is there. They probably won't, because it'll be transparent to them, as it should be. But throughout the system, we have a complete audit trail that will track every bit. And actually, that's one of the things that it just reminded me of my customer that basically said that, their auditing has become easier once the developers started to use this jobs as code approach, because they had a better audit trail that started much earlier that they could show when their auditors came in on the separation of duties when asked. And it was very easy to run the reports right within the tool itself.
Okay, thank you. And Tina, we have time for about 2 more questions. Tina, this is your final first question. When you adopt a jobs as code approach, when we adopt a jobs as code approach, do we have to change our current CI/CD tool chain?
No, and that's kind of the beauty of what we've done is we leverage and use APIs that allow us to quickly and easily integrate right within the existing CI/CD pipeline. So the source control management system, the build management system, Jenkins configuration, etc. You can use all the same tools that you're currently using, whether they be enterprise solutions or open source. Doesn't really matter. We can just fit right in, and we've developed this piece of our offering around Control M to make it really easy for people to be able to implement.
Got it. Okay. Helen, this is one for you. I'm struggling to get my business people engaged with our process. How can I get them more involved?
Yeah, so I'm hearing this one such a lot at the moment. So much so that I've actually started wondering if we should stop calling DevOps and start calling it Visit or BizIT, which seems to be where a lot of the conflict is. So, we've talked about years ago aligning IT with the business. We talked about integrating IT with the business. Now we have this concept where IT is the business. I think this is the crux of it. Where I don't see this problem happening so much, and this problem, by the way, manifests itself in lots of different ways, and in particular, if we're going to talk about the agile component of the super pattern, it would be, I see lots of organisations where they are using BAs, so business analysts and architects, as proxies for product owners, and that's basically telling us that the business has not viewed what the software team and the IT team are doing as important enough to give them a proper product owner. So this kind of lack of engagement, and really the crux of that is that the organisation has not yet recognised that their future is highly dependent on their use of technology. So we have some customers, Hiscox, one of our insurers in the UK, is very famous for this. Their founder, Robert Hiscox, stood up and said, "We're no longer an insurance company, we are a technology company." And it's taking lots of organisations a while to get there to be business people. The humans that have done things in a certain way for a long period of time have not yet recognised the absolute criticality of getting technology right for their future. So it is tricky. So how to get them involved? It's having conversations, it's inviting them to do things, it's getting them to do maybe experiential, immersive things with you so that they can start understanding what you do. It's doing things by learning to have conversations with them that are about value, learning to do things like writing value into user stories when you're writing things into your product backlog, learning how to report back to them in terms that they understand and they care about. So we do lots of metrics that matter type conversations with our customers, and there are metrics that do not matter to the business at all, like the number of defects. They just don't want any defects. What they do care about is if that new feature has changed the conversion rate on a particular web page, for example. So yes, a good question. Thank you, Peggy.
All right.
Where that came from. Yeah.
That's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Tina. Information Week appreciates your time and your expertise on today's topic. And we also would like to thank our sponsor, BMC Software, as well as everyone in the audience. We appreciate your attention and we appreciate your participation. Within the next 24 hours, you'll receive a personalized follow-up email with details and a link to today's presentation on demand. Please feel free to invite your colleagues and peers who may not have been able to listen to this event. This webinar is copyright 2017 by UBM. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by Information Week and BMC Software, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. On behalf of our guests, Helen and Tina, I'm Peggy Bresnick. Thank you for your time and have a great day.
Thank you.